happy to bring on this next guest. I'm always happy to bring on this next guest. He's been very gracious with his time and presence on both of my shows. And we want to get to the third portion of his interview. I mentioned online that we had 2 previous installments, so be sure to check those out if you missed them. But this is Erik Kramer. He played for the Lions and the Bears, among other teams. We covered that in the last segment. But now we're going to be getting to kind of his post-career, which is a very interesting and inspirational story. So welcome to the show, Erik.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that, Ryan. Good to be back on with you.
Yeah, happy to have you. I know you're I know you're a busy man. You're doing a lot of great stuff in the world and in the community here. So we'll keep it as brief as we can, but want to make sure to highlight this portion of your story, because basically we left off at your football career, because you always have to separate those, especially for an athlete. You got to say football career because your career proper is over basically in your 30s, or if you're a Tom Brady or somebody like that, you might go into your 40s, but then you have to move on to something else. But there were some other pieces that you did after that career. We probably should have covered those last time, but you dabbled in some commentating and things after your career, right?
Yeah, I'd say I had a pretty good life going. It was right away. My son Griffin at the time. Let's see, this was 1999, so he was like 6 years old, and about a couple years later, he decided he wanted to play football, and so I began coaching his youth football team, and then somehow, I don't know how this happened, but I got a call from Fox to come down and do an audition. I'm like, audition for what? And he said, speak in front of the camera and we'll see where it goes. And so I did. I was absolutely terrible. And then, but I started doing some college football games. In fact, the first college game I did was in Fresno State, where Fresno State played Boise State. And this was, I think, 2 weeks after 9/11. And this was the first day that LAX was open for business. And it was a ghost town. And so anyway, went up there and did that, and kind of about next 10 or 11 years, had the combination of coaching youth football, because Dylan was about 5 years behind, and so did that, played, didn't play, but then, like I said, got into broadcast. I actually got pretty good at it, and then also began working with some we started out as like middle school and high school kids at quarterback and receiver, and then that developed into some college and pro guys. And there was a former receiver, teammate of mine, Curtis Conway, and with the Bears, and Curtis was from out here. And so we had a little Sunday passing camp for high school kids, and this is probably, I don't know, 2005 or 6 through, we did that for 5-6 years. So anyway, yeah, that was kind of life in a nutshell back then, at least for the fun parts.
That is cool that you did that. Yeah, we talked off air about that, about the camps and stuff, and now you're trying to get back into that, and we'll circle back around to that, because that's kind of that's the end part of the current version of the story. But yeah, that's interesting that you did that. I could see you being a good commentator. I'm a fan of yours, as you know, anyway. So it's based on kind of who you're a fan of, but I really like the team of Kevin Harlan and Trent Green, and I could see you being very Trent Green-esque in your analysis. Like he's very solid. He thinks about the game well, and he was a good quarterback like yourself, and he's a good pair with Kevin Harlan, because Harlan kind of goes up and down, and Green just cuts right through the middle and has a lot of good analysis, but plays along with Kevin. Right.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Kevin, because when his brother, Brian, was the first, 3 or 4 years I was there with the Bears. Brian was the media relations director, and then when I got into broadcasting, Brian was actually my agent.
Interesting. I didn't even know. I'm a big Kevin Harlan fan. I didn't know that he had a brother that it was like a Marv and Kenny Albert situation.
Right. And when so you may, if you don't know if you remember Mike Utley?
I do. Yep.
Okay, so Mike and I were teammates, and obviously he suffered that tragic paralyzation in that 1991 season. Well, Mike and his wife Danny, I don't know if they're still there, but at the time they were living in St. George, and this is probably 4 or 5 years ago. And Mike has season tickets to the Raiders games, and so Arn and I came out there, and it just so happened that day Kevin Harlan was doing the game with Trent Green.
Interesting. Okay.
And so we went and, met him, and because I'd never met Trent Green before. But it's interesting that I was with the Chargers in 1999, and we were playing the Rams in that third preseason game where Trent Green went down. And I believe it was Rodney Harrison that ended up, I forget what the situation was, but he tackled him or hit him some way and tore his ACL. And that was the game that they transitioned from Trent Green to Kurt Warner.
Oh wow! Okay, I didn't realize it was right then. That's an interesting story because that basically changed that butterfly effect. Changed a lot of things in football history.
Yeah, it certainly did. And so anyway, that was life was. Life was pretty good there for a while.
And that's a normal path for somebody to follow after their career. Coaching and broadcasting seem to be kind of the first two choices for a lot of folks, but you still do miss the game. That's a big transition from being in that locker room and being with all the guys to doing those other things. And then obviously the losses for you kind of started to pile up because you had that loss of your career and then that camaraderie in the locker room, and then unfortunately you had some losses in your personal life as well.
That's correct. And so that's when it went from being fun to the opposite of that. And so my Griffin, who I'd mentioned prior, he had some unfortunate things go his way in life, and they started back in I forget what the year was. It would have been like 2006 or 7, something like that. He was around 13 years old at the time, and my then wife and I were going to marriage counseling, where Griffin became the subject matter quite often. And so the therapist we were seeing also had a neuropsychologist in part of his group, which I didn't even know what a neuropsychologist was back then. And he had suggested that we potentially talk to the neuropsychologist about getting Griffin evaluated. And so we did. And at that age, it's about an 8 or so hour process, an evaluation. And so the doctor breaks it down into maybe 2-hour-ish segments, so it takes place over about 3 days. And the tragedy for Griffin was that his brain, the frontal part of his brain, which was responsible for, among other things, organization, did not work right. And so his ability to kind of pay attention when someone else was talking was non-existent. And so he had, severe learning disabilities. But what almost was more crushing was that he didn't have the ability to see that the connection between his words and actions and the sabotaging effect it was having on the relationships he was seeking. So he literally internally could not figure out why no one was calling. So it went from, not being included to just nobody was around. And so eventually, as we all need to be connected somewhere and to people, Griffin had a really difficult time, and eventually he ended up if you think of your relationships as sort of as a pyramid. If it starts up here, and that's not working, then you're going to go a little further down, then a little further down. And eventually you're going to find some of those other people, young people, that, you can relate with eventually. And unfortunately, the people that Griffin got around were, leading him down a dark path, and eventually he went from hanging around the wrong crowd to being the wrong crowd. And it was in, I believe, around October-ish of his, so school had just begun with him as a 10th grader. And he went right into drug rehab I think he stayed there about 3 months. And then then there was an outpatient program, same outfit. And that's why I really began to see him flourish, like believing in himself. Like his school, which they did introduce, was sort of in this one-on-one or small group environment. And he really did believe in himself. And school-wise and the people he was around, his relationships got better at home, and then with the kids that he was in the same program with. And then that ended in around, I want to say, January or February of 2011. And then he went back to school, regular high school, and that was probably once again the wrong environment for him. And so he ended up several months later in October of dying of a heroin overdose. It was a relapse. So he'd been sober for, a good year and a half-ish. So, yeah, that was a tough, saddest day of my life, saddest day of Dylan's life, because in the same day that I learned, not only was Griffin dead, but I went to the house where he died, and then had to come back and tell Dylan. So that was the worst, probably the worst day at that point of my life.
Yeah, I'm sorry you had to go through that. They say that having a parent lose a child is kind of the worst possible thing, because that's obviously not typically how life is supposed to go. Loss is hard no matter what direction it happens in, but especially with the upward trend that he was on, because I remember that from the podcast and the book, that it did seem like he was putting some things together, so you had to be a little bit buoyed by kind of the upward trend that he had from having those struggles with the learning disability and the cognitive issues, but that was a very good description of how those things can happen. I think it's an illuminating description for people that this stuff doesn't all happen at once. There's a lot of different things that happen, as far as, maybe you isolate yourself a little bit, or a quirk about yourself makes you feel isolated, and then also isolates you. And that's one of the things I know you're kind of focused on after what you eventually went through, is kind of the community element, because none of us can survive in isolation. We all need community.
That's right. I mean, there's a reason that when you do go to jail, they do have something called the whole, or solitary confinement, which it does not work. And so, and I think for me, almost unknowingly, the kind of internal pressure started to mount, because prior to Griffin passing away, the day after Mother's Day of that same year, 2011, she had found out she had stage 4 uterine cancer. And so it was like one day she was seemingly feeling okay, and the next day she wasn't. Like, that was a big shock. And then there was about a year there where she had some radical surgery, but my aunt Patrice, my mom's sister, refers to that as my mom's golden year, where all of the sort of pretext of her life, or the things that she used to sort of sharply care about, she didn't. And it was just about her family and the relationships that she had her whole life, and that was really where she and I grew much closer than ever. And but then, of course, her cancer returned, and so she passed away in July after Griffin had passed away the previous October. And so right around that time, my dad, who had some untreated acid reflux, found out that had turned into esophageal cancer. And I don't know if you've ever seen or known anybody that's gone through dealing with that, but that's a downward spiral that there's no such thing as a better day. And it just went from he couldn't swallow, and just kept getting weaker and weaker, and eventually had to have an operation. And just, that was a tough emotional decline that he went down, to see him go down. And so yeah, like you mentioned before, well, you didn't, but like the struggles I had in my marriage, coupled with the loss of everything, just made it. I had kind of unknowingly put myself in isolation, and so the worst person, I should say, what depression and anxiety and isolation does is it zaps you of your perspective. Like, you're the worst one, or I was at that time the worst one that had any perspective on my own life. And so that eventually culminated in August of 2015 with my attempting to take my own life. So I had done everything that you would think of to do, maybe not you, but that I did think of to do to sort of provide for those that weren't those that I loved, that I wasn't going to be here to look after anymore, namely my son Dylan, who at that time, and I didn't notice this, so please bear with me here a second. This just popped in my head. So this is how not with it I was. So Dylan at the time was 17 years old, and I did this on August 18th, 2015, which just happened to be the day before the beginning of Dylan's junior year of high school.
Okay. I didn't realize that coincided there.
Yeah. So, those are things that a person in the state of mind I was in didn't even consider. And so I'm so thankful that, my one attempt did not work out, and this is a way of, I'm glad it didn't work, right? So it wasn't like I missed the target, but I'm glad that I'm here, and with the help of some amazing doctors and rehab specialists afterward, and the love and support of my friends and family, here I am.
And we're happy you're here, and I know you are too. And I tell a lot of people this in my life, especially the quieter ones. It's hard to address a problem or identify a problem or help somebody with a problem if it's not aired in some way. I always tell them, don't suffer in silence, because that's where you get situations like this. And I never thought of the comparison, but it's a great comparison that you made. That's one of the that's one of the biggest penalties you can have when you've already been penalized and put into prison because you committed a crime and made an error. That's how they further penalize you. They can't.
Yeah.
They can't put you in more prison, but that they kind of do because that's why they have solitary confinement. But we have a tendency to do that to ourselves. I'm guilty of it too. I've done it, and yeah, you're at the mercy of your own mind that goes in this loop that's not necessarily the healthiest, and then it's hard to get yourself out of that loop.
That's right. So it's kind of like yes, so if you take it out of the personal element and put it into prison terms, not only are you in prison physically, but psychologically, I think is the when you go to solitary confinement, it's more of a psychological prison, and so like you had mentioned, unfortunately, I did it to myself, and people who suffer from anxiety and depression and whatever other elements are involved, it's you unknowingly do that to yourself.
And that's one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation. There's a lot of good stuff to come after this, and that's where kind of the inspirational, there's also some other trials and tribulations that you have along the way that we'll also cover, but it's supposed to be inspirational for people and informational for people that might be dealing with this, because there's a lot of people that deal with this from day to day, and it would be a hard thing to kind of put a number on, but mental health is a real crisis nowadays with all the things that are going on and the pulls on people's time and the pressures and social media and all sorts of factors. And so that's why it needs to serve as somewhat of a PSA. People like you are a great example of overcoming those issues. And the big thing, I know we've talked about this when we met, that prevention is huge with this, because you can't know what you've prevented by talking about it, but you know that you have helped people and have helped that butterfly effect from spreading out and getting worse. You've improved that and you've helped other people, but it's hard to know who you've stopped from doing that, because that's not the type of information we get. But you know that you're doing that, and that's what your story can and has helped to do for various people.
That you said it great. Perfectly. And I think that it's the idea that the idea is not to wait until you're in crisis, it's to be proactive. And what I like to think of now is my own little home team. They don't have to be big. It doesn't have to be 40, 50 people. Just 1, 2, 3 people that you look at who, over time, me or anybody, you could observe those around you, and the people that have, sort of these good human qualities, and they're different for everybody, but something that's appealing would be things like empathetic, or a good, active, curious listener, or somebody who would sort of actively pursue. They themselves would be attuned to other people, meaning they might not wait to be asked, but they might approach somebody who they care about and notice, hey, is everything okay? Because here's a couple of examples that I've seen going on, and I'm just wondering, are you okay? And if not, let's go to lunch, or I've got all day, or whatever. And I think it's having 2 or 3 people in your life like that would be, could start out in some time in your childhood, and as time goes along, you continue to cultivate, those types of people that, become part of yours, and hopefully you become part of their home team. And, I'll say this, that I'm going to be out in Michigan next week. There's a couple who I've been now connected to for a few years, Jill and Steve Miskelly, and their son Ian, I think about 4 or 5 years ago, was a scholarship swimmer at University of Michigan, and Ian took his own life. And the process they went through of trying to participate in Ian's therapy and recovery was left a bad taste in their mouth. And so they're having their third gala to raise money for their nonprofit called Team Be Better. And so I'm going to be out speaking at that. I believe the gala is a week from Friday, so a week from, what is that, tomorrow? And so, yeah, I mean, there's, all kinds of people with all kinds of stories who, but the common denominators are not that different. And it's just people struggling and in need of a good path where they can gain some traction and get some momentum to, one step at a time, feel good about yourself and your life and your purpose and the way you can feel good about contributing, usually to others.
Exactly. And I think it's a good opportunity to remind people that everybody has this in their life, or the opportunity to pursue it and find it in other people, because I've had people tell me, well, I don't have anybody in my life. I don't, and there are people with rough circumstances, but there are people that you can get on this home team, either from those friends or family members that you've had throughout your life that wouldn't hesitate to help you if you reached out to them, or new people like these organizations that you talked about. I've got the information. Yeah, this is in our area. I didn't realize. So this is in Holland, March 6th. 6:30 to 9:30, and so yeah, we'll share the information on this. It's at 136 East 6th Street in Holland, Warehouse 6 Events, next Friday. But we'll share the information for that, because again, I'd like to attend. I'll be out of town actually on my own speaking engagement. Otherwise, I would be there. But definitely something to support, and I'm glad you're doing that, because as you mentioned, Erik, everybody needs this, and we need more empathy in the world, and it's a cultivating effect that it has. So I feel like that's a good place to leave off, because I want to be respectful of your time, and I know we got to get you out of here, but then we can do the fourth part and kind of talk about the different things that happen after this that the podcast kind of addresses. But I'm glad we were able to highlight that, and please feel free to add anything else in of what else you have going on here. Okay, that's great. Nothing now, but looking forward to the next time we get together, and sorry that I'll miss you this time around in Holland, but hopefully we'll join up here at some point in the future. Definitely. I look forward to one of your other appearances. I know you're working on a gala of your own and a bunch of causes, so we'll be happy to help with advertising that and help in any way I can with these things. But I think this conversation itself hopefully helps some people and the struggles that they are going through. And then be sure to tune into part 4. We'll be scheduling that soon with Erik when he's available, because it's kind of the culmination of all of this. But appreciate you sharing what you did, and that you're doing all these events to make people better and help the world around you, and increase your home team. I'm glad that you're on our home team, and I'm on your home team too. So appreciate you joining us. Very good. Appreciate everything. Thanks, Ryan. Have a good rest of your day. Thanks. You too, Erik.